Hello friends, in this video we will cover the essential PowerApps interview question and answers that will focus on the two critical topics, delegations and the custom connectors. So here you will learn how to handle the delegation limits effectively and managing the large data set and ensuring the optimal performance in the PowerApps. And we will dive deep into the custom connectors that will show how you to integrate the external data sources and build the powerful apps by using the API. So whether you are preparing for Power Apps interview or want to expand your knowledge, this video basically offers the valuable insights with the practical examples and the scenario based questions. So watch now to boost your Power Apps expertise and keep subscribing this channel for the latest video, and that will be definitely help you for interview perspective and for knowledge perspective. So let's start. So the question is, you have a SharePoint list with 10,000 items and you need to filter records where the status is completed. So here you need to fetch all the record that are having the status as a completed. What should you consider to ensure this operation is delegated? So for the delegation, you just need to use a delegable function like filter here, and that will be a delegator operator like equal to. Here you need to ensure that the column being filtered, like in this our case, it will be status, that should be indexed in the SharePoint for the better optimized performance. Next question is, you need to find the records in a SQL Server table where the start date is greater than a specific date. What will be the best approach? So here you need to use the filter function that will be combined with the greater than operator, means which is delegable to SQL Server. So it basically ensure to the start date column is indexed into the SQL Server. Next question is, you want to sort a large data set by a specific column and then take the top 100 records. How do you ensure the delegation? So here you need to use the sort function, that is a delegable function, and after that you need to use the first n function to retrieve the top 100 record. That will ensure the column you are sorting by is indexed. So basically column should be indexed, that will be make faster for retrieving the data. Your app needs to display all items where the title contains the word Power Apps. So here the title should contain the Power Apps. What issue might arise with delegation and how can you resolve them? So here the search function is not delegable for many data sources. So instead use the filter function. Okay. So here you will use the filter function and that will be start with or equal to if possible. So for large data set, consider re-architecting your query or using the view. You want to calculate the total sales from a large data set in a SQL Server table. How can you do this while ensuring delegation? In this case, you need to use the sum function on the server side by creating a view or a store procedure in the SQL Server. View you will create in case of the SharePoint, and a store procedure you will create in case of the SQL Server, and it will return the total sales. And direct sum operations on the large data set in PowerApps might not be delegated. You need to filter records where the amount column is within a certain range. So suppose here you need to put the amount column between the 100 to 500. What should you be aware of? In this case, you will use the filter function with the greater than equal to or less than equal to operators. It will, and ensure the amount column is indexed in this case. So both operators are delegable to many data sources. You are tasked with displaying the latest 500 record with SharePoint list. that should be ordered by the creation date. How do you handle the delegation? So in this case you will use the sort function and you will create the order by as a created column, and sort function is a delegable function. Then after you need to use the first n to select the latest 500 record, and again you need to ensure that created column is index column. You need to group records by a category and calculate the average value in each group. How you will delegate this operation? So grouping and aggregation functions like group by are not always delegable. For large data set, we need to perform these operations in the data source level, such as by using the view in the SQL Server. You want to check if a record exists in a large data set based on the specific condition. What function will be used that are delegable? In this case, you will use the lookup function, which is a delegable, and that is basically supported operators on the data sources and ensure the conditions can be delegated. What app needs to update a specific field in multiple records simultaneously? So there is a requirement that you need to update any specific field for multiple records. So how do you ensure this operation is delegated? In this case, you need to use the patch function with a delegable filter to select the records that need to update. And here we also need to make ensure that only the necessary records are updated on the server side. Not all the records should be updated. You are filtering a large data set by a complex formula that involves the multiple conditions. How can you optimize the delegation? You need to break down the filter into multiple simple delegable conditions and ensure that all the conditions are delegable. You also need to avoid using the non-delegable functions within the filter. You need to sum a column's value but only for records that meet certain criteria. What should you consider to ensure delegation? Here you need to use the filter function to select the records, and after that you need to call the sum function. And we need to ensure that both operations are delegable to the data source. Your app needs to retrieve and display a list of distinct values from a large dataset. Is this operation delegable? So the distinct function is not always delegable. For large dataset, considering the performing this operation at a data source level, such as using a view or store procedure, is a much better approach. We want to paginate through a large dataset by loading records in the batches. How can we achieve this in a delegable manner? So here you need to use the first filter, then top and functions with delegation friendly operators that will load the records into the batches. And you also need to implement the logic that will track the last loaded record for that seamless pagination. You need to join the two large dataset that are based on a key column. What should you be aware during the delegation? So joins are not natively supported in the PowerApps for delegation. You need to consider using a view or query in the data source to perform the join, then retrieve the results in the PowerApps. Your app filters record based on a calculated column. Calculated column is nothing but a data derived from a formula. And how can delegation be handled here? So calculated columns are generally non-delegable. To ensure the delegation, you need to calculate the value in the data source. For example, SQL or SharePoint rather than in the Power Apps. There is a requirement that where you need to search for records where a specific column starts with a certain string. How do you handle the delegation? In this case, you will use the start with function that are delegable in the many data sources. In this case, you will not use the search function, and whatever column you are going to use, that should be index column. Your app needs to fetch the record that match a set of multiple IDs. What is the best way to delegate this operation? You will use the filter function with the in operator because it is a delegable in the many data sources like SQL Server, and ID column should be index. You want to apply a dynamic filter where the condition changes based on the user input. How can you ensure the delegable? This is a good question. So in this case, you will use the filter function with the simple delegable operators, and you will validate that the dynamic conditions are still delegable and do not include any non-delegable functions. Your app displays the data based on the user's geographical location like latitude and longitude. How can you ensure the delegation? Here we will use the delegable function like filters with a delegable comparison operators like greater than equal to or less than equal to filter the based on the longitude and latitude. You need to check for the duplicates in the large data set. What approach you should take? So we need to check the duplicate value here. So here you need to use the data source query like SQL view to identify duplicates before retrieving the data in the PowerApps. PowerApps functions to identify duplicates are not always delegable. Your app requires counting the number of records that meet a specific condition. So here you need to show the counting. What is the best practice to ensure a delegation? Here you will use the function count row that will be combined with the filter. You need to retrieve the records where the date column is within the last 30 days. How you will ensure the delegation? Filter function will be used, and after that you need to use the date function. And what operator you will use? Greater than equal to. And ensure that filter condition is simple and delegable. Date function like date may be delegable depending on the data source. Your app should fetch the first record that matches a condition from a large dataset. What is the best approach? Lookup function need to use here, which is delegable when using the supported operators and the simple conditions, and ensure that filter condition is delegable. Next question is, you want to apply a filter based on a user role where the role information is stored in another table. How can you manage this with delegation? So prefetch the user role information and then apply the filters using the delegable function. Or you can use a view or join in a data source to handle the role based filtering before retrieving the data in the PowerApps. Now let's read some questions related to the custom connectors. You need to create a custom connector to an external API that requires authentication through custom headers. How would you set up the authentication in the custom connector? So in the custom connector, I would configure the authentication by choosing the API key or 2.0 depending on the API requirement. Then in the security tab, we need to define the required headers like authorization and configure the key value pairs. This will basically ensure that API key or the token is passed correctly with the each request. How do you handle the multiple API versions in a single custom connector? In this case, you need to create a different actions or the triggers within the custom connectors, and each trigger will corresponding to a different versions of the API. So in the definition tab, I would define the separate operations and will use the appropriate versions in the URL path for each operation. So by this way, it will allow the same connectors to support the multiple API versions. You are using an API that has a rate limit. How do you manage this within a custom connectors to avoid exceeding the limits? So to manage the rate limit, I would implement a retry policy in the custom connectors. In the definition tab, I would configure the retry policy to handle a specific status code like 4 to 9, like too many requests. This policy can include exponential backoff to minimize the chances of hitting the rate limit. How do you handle an API that returns different schemas based on the input parameter? So in this case, I would use the dynamic schema in the custom connectors, and in the definition tab, I would set the XMS dynamic schema property. This property we need to set, okay, and that will allow the connectors to retrieve and use different schema based on the input parameter that are achieved by dynamically. You need to pass sensitive data such as API key or token. How do you ensure these are securely handled in the custom connector? So in the custom connector, there is a security tab. There you need to define the sensitive data like API key or the token. For auth 2.0, you need to configure the token endpoint securely. And you need to ensure that sensitive information is not locked or exposed to any responses. In API, you are connecting to returns data in the pages. How do you configure a custom connector to handle the pagination? So the answer should be I would handle the pagination by defining a pagination rule in the definition tab. For instance, I would specify the pagination parameters like next link or offset and configure the connector to automatically follow these links until all pages are retrieved. How do you configure a custom connector to change its behavior based on the input parameter? So I would use the conditional logic within a definition tab. So in the definition tab, we can do multiple settings. So by defining here the multiple operations and using the conditional parameters, the custom connectors can execute different operations or return different responses based on the user input. If you need to manipulate data before sending it to an API, how do you achieve it? So in this case, I would utilize the policies within the custom connector to include custom code such as JavaScript to manipulate the data before sending it to API. So with the help of the JavaScript, manipulation can be done, and this can be done in the definition tab where you can add pre-processing steps before the request is sent. You need to connect a SOAP based web service. How do you set up a custom connector for this? So for SOAP based API, I would select the SOAP as a API type whenever we are going to create the custom connector, and in the definition tab I would import the WSDL file. It is required for the SOAP and configure the operations on the base of that. So PowerApps and PowerAutomate have native support for SOAP that will allow the easy integration. How do you configure a custom connectors to work across multiple environments such as development, test or production? So in this case, I would use the environment variables or parameters within the custom connectors, and it will allow the different endpoints or the credential to be used depending on the environment. These parameters can be set up in the general tab, and that can be configured at the runtime or during the deployment. An API returns a deeply nested JSON response. So we have got the response. How would you pass this within a custom connector? So in the definition tab, you need to define the complex output schema that matches the nested JSON structure. So this schema will allow PowerApps or Power Automate to pass the response and access the nested data. What are the steps to certify a custom connectors for use across all tenants in the PowerApps and Power Automate? So to certify a custom connector, I would follow the certification process by ensuring it meets the Microsoft standards for the security, reliability and the performance. And it will include through the testing, documentation and submitting the connectors for review to the partner center. And Microsoft then reviewed the connectors before making it available to all the tenants. How do you handle file uploads in the custom connectors? So for file upload, you need to configure the operations that accept the binary data in the definition tab. And it will involve the setting the content type header and ensuring the connectors can handle the file streams. How would you configure the custom error message in a custom connector? In the definition tab, you can define, and there you can define the custom error responses by setting up the specific status code and whatever error message against that. And it will definitely allow the more user friendly error handling and provides the clean guidance for the ensuring the whatever error encountered during the API. How would you set up a custom connector that access on-premises data? So on-premises data gateway will be required, that will be in the combination with the custom connector. And the gateway provides a secure bridge between the cloud and on-premise data source. So whenever you need to access the on-premise data things, you need to use the data gateway. And it will allow the custom connectors to access and interact within the on-premise API. How can you implement the caching in the API responses in a custom connector to improve the performance? So caching definitely ensure that improve the performance. So in this case, you need to configure the caching policy in the custom connector by using the definition tab. There is a cache setting you can find. This can be done by defining the cache control header or using the connectors policy that cache responses based on the specific criteria. How do you create a custom connector to interact with a GraphQL API? So for GraphQL API, you need to configure the custom connectors by defining a single operation that send a post request with the GraphQL query in the body. And the connectors would then pass the response based on the structure of the query result. Next question is how do you configure the OAuth 2.0 authentication in the custom connector? So in the security tab, you can define the OAuth 2.0 authentication in the custom connector. Here you need to provide the authorization URL and the token URL and whatever is the client credential. And this setup basically ensures the security token based authentication for all the API requests. How would you handle versioning in a custom connectors to support ongoing updates? In this situation, I would maintain the different versions of the custom connectors by cloning the connectors and updating the version number in the general tab. And it will allow for continued use of the older versions within newer versions. How would you debug the issues within a custom connectors and monitor its performance? So this is a debugging part. So in this case, you need to use the built-in logins and diagnostic features within the Power Apps and Power Automate that capture the detailed log, whatever the API request and whatever response we are received for that. This can be done by the enabling logging in the different definition tab and reviewing the log in the Power Platform Admin Center. So you need to enable by using the definition, and you can review the log in the Power Platform Admin Center. So thanks friends for watching this video, and if you enjoyed this video, so don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe our channel, and I will keep publishing the more content like this that will definitely help you to grow, and for the interview perspective also it is much helpful. So I will appreciate for each and every one of our subscriber. So until next time, take care and stay awesome. Thank you.